A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the PIDA CBN Media Breakfast session here in Swakopmund. It's almost a desert, doesn't feel like a desert weather-wise, isn't it? Someone was saying it's like winter here. But welcome to it, and welcome to everybody that's here. I was saying to someone that it's quite interesting, and this is one of the meetings that I've been to where the fourth estate is briefed before anyone else. So clearly, it's a sign of things to come, and I think it's compliments to Mr. Mayaki and the team in making sure that we then get to tell, as the media, I suppose, get to tell the story, and we get to hear from those who are involved at the core of it, telling us exactly what is happening. So, house rules, this is how we are going to do it. No slides, no speeches, and no PowerPoints. We're just going to get into it and get to understand exactly what we're talking about when we talk about PIDA Week. And I thought the media would be very happy in that. Also, when you ask questions, be succinct to the point. Tell us whom you're asking the question to, so that we do allow. As you can see, time is not on our side. My name is Daniel Makokera, and I'll be your host for the next few hours whilst we're having this breakfast. So, really the event is about to relate to the media fraternity the narrative on how PIDA remain the crucial key to unlocking Africa's infrastructure potential, showcase the achievements of the PIDA to date, to strengthen PIDA and CBN partnership, and the media, and to acknowledge the advocacy role of media as central for promoting PIDA and the CBN, and also to sharpen media reportage and increase coverage on Africa's infrastructure. I know that there are people who already have been reporting on PIDA, but I think there's always room to have more friendly fire, as it were, from the media sector on those people who can tell the story from an informed position. So let's get into it. I think first off, we will have the representative of the government of the Republic of Namibia in the form of the Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Works and Transport here in Namibia, and he's Mr. Willem Goeieman. A round of applause in anticipation of what he's about to say. And this is yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, and then good morning to everybody. Let me take this opportunity also just to acknowledge my fellow panelists, as well as the Minister, the Honorable Minister Kapanchi from DRC. Welcome, first of all, welcome to Namibia, welcome to Swakopmund, and welcome to this session. My task is really simple, just to say welcome. We really look forward to having you in Namibia. Let's have an interactive session. My minister, who is going to open the session later this morning, would be around in about 2.5 hours from here. Everybody's looking at me. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much. I think we also have the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Information to also give his welcome address to everybody. So,
good morning. My names are very simple, and the moderator is not able to state them to you. I'm called Mbeuta Wanjarak, and I've been in this ministry. It's the simplest surname in Namibia anyway. I'm called Mbeuta Wanjarak, and have been in this ministry for the last 10 years. Welcome to the land of the brave. 27 years ago, when we got our birth, we refused to remain the last born child of Africa forever. Hence, our enjoined gratitude to be accorded this opportunity, and particularly I'm inviting my media brothers and sisters in Namibia to join me in welcoming the media fraternity, and also to piece together the fact that whatever crude infrastructure efforts that my brother Goeieman portfolio has been pursuing in this country, dry country, wet country, cool country. It is in tandem with the dreams of Africa through the PIDA, and hence our glory in being given this marvelous Christmas 2017 to be hosting the PIDA Week in the land of the brave.
Thank you very much. PS, I just wanted to prove to you that I'm not alone in struggling. Is anyone who can repeat the PS name? I didn't think so. Now we go to just get to hear the meat of the whole issue. I invite Dr. Ibrahim Mayaki, the CEO of the Neighborhood Agency. So all I'm asking is, in a nutshell, you give an overview of where we are, and then we get to interact. Sir.
Thank you, moderator. Permanent secretaries, Director of Infrastructure at the African Union Commission, and I would like to recognize the Minister of DRC, Mr. Kapenji, who does so much for pushing infrastructure, and in particular INGA, which is no longer a national project of DRC, but an African regional project. And as we'll move from INGA free to a Grand INGA, it will reaffirm the role that DRC is playing in Africa's regional integration. So I salute you. Mine will be on 6 points. The first one is a short review of how PIDA was designed and why PIDA was designed. Most of you here know the story, but it's always good to come back to the origins, because the origins do highlight why we are here and what we are doing. So why was PIDA created? Two fundamental reasons. Africa had not prioritized its regional infrastructure projects. And as we had not prioritized our regional infrastructure projects, the coherence of the delivery process in regional integration, that coherence was very weak. So the African Development Bank, the African Union Commission, decided to put the house in order. So PIDA is about putting the house in order, making sure that we have priorities in terms of regional infrastructure projects. And how was it done? In a bottom-up process, building on the master plans of regional economic communities. So on the basis of the master plans of regional economic communities, there was an interactive process with several iterations in order to reach a global system, which we call PIDA, and with quite a good number of projects, more than 400 projects. Some partners were not very confident in the fact that Africa could lay out that vision with an operational dimension. But we pursued in our objective, and we finally had a consensus through all the regions and through the main stakeholders that were going to look after the implementation, lead it, and with the lead of the African Union Commission, the regional economic communities, the African Development Bank, the Economic Commission for Africa, and NEPAD agency, which plays the role of an implementing agency of the African Union. So this is point number one. Point number two, what did we do with this pipeline of projects? And what constraints did we face? In this pipeline of projects, we had to, again, make sure that priorities were defined. So we went towards a priority action plan regarding the implementation of PIDA, and we reduced the volume of projects from 400 to 50. And with specific criteria which took into account the regional dimension, the developmental dimension, the sectoral dimension between transport, ICT, energy, and a dimension which we do not frequently remember, but which was embedded in the design from the start, which is job creation. And as a matter of fact, the theme of this PIDA week has to do with job creation. So the economic modeling of PIDA had embedded in its system the issue of job creation, which shows the link between the prioritization of our projects and our development strategy, which were going to be implemented. It is very important to mention that fact. Why is it important to mention that fact? Because we are not just talking about roads, about dams, about transmission lines. We are talking about development. And we are talking about development based on regional integration. And infrastructure fits into that rationale. The rationale is regional integration, and regional integration will be the key to development. And in that context, this is where infrastructure fits. Point number 3, the implementation of PIDA had to be based on an institutional architecture. And as a matter of fact, PIDA is the only continental strategic framework that has an institutional architecture where clearly defined lines of reporting and lines of decision-making and lines of implementation are set. The decision-making process regarding PIDA is embedded in the African Union Commission. The implementation process regarding PIDA is embedded continentally at the level of the development agency of the African Union, which is the NEPAD agency. And the implementers, evidently, are the regional economic communities and the countries. So you have a coherent institutional system in order to deliver on priority projects. And why is this important? Because that institutional coherence is a sine qua non condition if we want to report properly on the progresses we are making, not only on infrastructure, but on development issues. Point number 4, what we flagged as a key instrument in order to make PIDA effective was the concept of corridors. 30, 40 years from now, people will not talk, Africans will less talk about Niger, my country, or DRC, the country of a minister, or Namibia, or Kenya. They will talk about regional corridors where they can displace themselves, where there is an economic density, where there are structured projects, and where logistics constraints are not an issue. Corridors are the future of this continent. The Central Corridor, the North-South Corridor, the Lagos-Abidjan Corridor, the Algiers-Lagos Corridor. Corridors are the future of a continent. It is within corridors that we'll have an optimality in terms of implementing our priority projects. It is within corridors that will increase our capacity to create jobs. Point number 5, what brings us together during the PIDA weeks is not only the motivation to look backwards and try to see what we have done, the progresses we have made. It is fundamentally the necessity to responsibilize ourselves. We are an active minority, and most of us here have a responsibility in making sure that PIDA goes forward. And when we say PIDA, we also talk about the several instruments of PIDA. Project preparation with a service delivery mechanism, the Continental Business Network, which is a platform where the private sector can engage high-level policymakers in order to highlight constraints of regulatory frameworks, etc. And the last instrument, which is the 5% agenda, where we realize that the capitalization of the sovereign wealth funds and the pension funds is way above 1.5 trillion, and these sovereign wealth funds and pension funds invest very little in Africa's development. I'm not saying infrastructure, in Africa's development. They prefer to buy United States highways and so on, and Australia's assets rather than investing in development. But at the same time, you cannot blame them, because we didn't do our homework in sensitizing them with a proper information on how to invest and where to invest. So this instrument, the 5% agenda, allows these institutional investors to look at infrastructure in a much more positive dimension and engage with us on bankable and investable projects. We need to do our homework. So we gather here to to be conscious of our responsibilities. We are not just interacting for the sake of interacting and trying to paint a beautiful landscape. No, the landscape is not beautiful. The landscape is hard, the constraints are hard, but we are soldiers determined to lift these and unlock these constraints. So this is what PIDA Week is about. Referring to how the SWAPO did liberate Namibia, and referring to the mentality which still is distilled within Namibia's systems, public and somehow private. This is a good place to be in order to foster that liberation thinking. So PIDA Week is about liberating infrastructure within corridors so that Africa can make progresses in regional integration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Mayaki, for that very succinct and clear overview on why we are gathered here. And you have outlined that the house is not in order, and you've also said that there are 400 projects that are out there. You also said partners were not quite convinced when you started on this journey. You also said that this is about job creation, and the prioritization of these projects are about job creation, and of course it's to foster regional integration, and there's an institutional architecture that really is the hallmark of what PIDA is all about. And the implementers are the RECs and the member states. And the Africa of tomorrow will be about corridors, and that's what people will be talking about. Of course, you also spoke about wanting to making sure that these projects are very much ready for them to be implemented. You spoke about the 5% agenda, and you ended by talking about making sure that these projects are also bankable, which is a term that I get to hear a lot in different forums about bankable projects. And I think that's where I want to start our discussion and maybe talk to your partners who are in the banking sector. And maybe I should start with you, Mohan, and say you've heard what the CEO has said, and the issue is not lack of projects, but the issue is really, do we have bankable projects so that we get to unlock that vibrant African economies that we want to see. Mohan.
Yes, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity. And obviously, this is a crucial issue that we're discussing. And the point that you're raising about the number of projects versus those that are bankable and can really be done specifically by the private sector is an important one. You know, if I can refer to one statistic on the number of PPP projects that were executed in sub-Saharan Africa last year, according to a World Bank database on private participation in infrastructure, there were only 11 projects in all of sub-Saharan Africa, within the infrastructure space, that were executed as PPPs. 11. And that number dropped from about 25 the year before, and the reason for the drop was that more than half of those projects in the previous year were power projects that were being done as part of the renewable energy program in South Africa. And as that program ground to a halt in 2016, you saw there was a 50% drop or more in the number of projects. So the reality is there are very few of these projects that are happening. Similarly, for instance, and if we kind of speak a little bit just from on an open and honest perspective, from a Southern African perspective, we were working with the PPP unit within the SADC DFI network, looking at what are called the Regional Infrastructure Development Master Plan for SADC, the RIDIMP for short. And of the 45-odd projects that were part of that, which were part of the master plan for the region, we could at the time only prioritize 5 of them to take forward, which means a lot of them really are more ideas than they are projects that are bankable. So I think that does give you a view of the challenge out there, and the importance of, specifically from the government's perspectives, to say there's very limited fiscal space to be able to invest in infrastructure. It's a problem in South Africa now, but throughout the region and the continent. And so yes, on the one hand, there is a lot of global capital that's wanting to invest, but somebody has to pay for that infrastructure ultimately. Over 20 years, through user fees or through the fiscus. And the reality is the ability of the fiscus and the population to be able to pay for the infrastructure is limited. And that's why the work that's being done around PIDA, around prioritization, ensuring that the right projects are being identified and funded are very, very important. Because I think ultimately that is going to be the issue that's going to make or break the bankability of these projects.
Thank you very much, Mr. Caveres. I'll come to you. I see you're nodding. But I just want to follow up and say, so the issue is not lack of projects. The issue is getting to bankability. That's what you've just told us, right, Mohan? So how do we get there? Because, we can sit here and have a nice discussion on things are going well, we have the projects, but I actually heard you saying most of them were not projects, they were ideas. So how do we get to bankability? Yes, coming to you, Mohan, yes.
Well, it's a little bit of a philosophical issue to begin with, right? If you think about the numbers, 1/3 of all infrastructure in the world is being funded and built in China. And if you look at how they're doing it, they're spending 40% plus of their GDP in investments. So, ultimately, as a continent, we need to save more money and use that excess savings to fund our own infrastructure. And that's what we talk about around domestic resource mobilization. The reality is, as a continent, we don't save enough money, and therefore, we are always needing money from the Europeans or the Asians or whoever, because we don't have our own resources to fund it. Now, but that's a long-term issue, right? And what we're talking about now is more specifically, and I think the point, though, is there is enough economic growth that there are still enough projects that if the regulatory framework was in place, we can finance.
Okay.
And I think those are, that's going to be one of the challenges is around the regulatory frameworks, ensuring that the offtake's in place, so that investors are sure that, the money that they're putting in can be recovered.
Thank you. Piers Huiman. Mohan is talking about regulatory frameworks, and he's almost painting a very dark picture. Is it as dark as he paints it? And I'm glad he's honest, because he's a money man. But at a country level, how are you doing it?
Thank you. I think what he's saying is the truth. I think there is need, there is scope for us to improve our regulatory framework. I think governments are at work to do that. In Namibia, we are trying our best. Probably in this context, I can simply indicate that we have decided that Namibia should be a logistics hub, specifically for landlocked countries in Southern Africa. And we are talking about Botswana, we are talking about Zambia, Zimbabwe, and to a certain extent, DRC. What we have done also in that framework, in terms of regional integration and cooperation, we have given, for example, a land at the port of Walvis Bay that you'll be visiting, I think, on Thursday, so that these countries can establish their dry ports and et cetera, and et cetera. We are not trying to compete with anybody. What we are simply saying is that let us put the assets that we have at the disposal of the region for our people, and then in the context of SADC, and et cetera, and et cetera. And I think we are getting there. We have made heavy investments in the port of Walvis Bay. I think you will see it on Thursday. We are deepening the port, and some of those investments, definitely you will see them. But it's just a question of time. I think we will get there. Infrastructure investment takes time. You cannot just invest today and expect the benefits to accrue in 2 years' time. It takes time, and then we are also doing this for posterity, for the future generations to come. And then hopefully development institutions like the Development Bank of Southern Africa and ADB and et cetera, and of course the African Union as well, and the REX, as has been mentioned. I think those are those institutions that could assist us to get there. Thank you.
Well, you say this is for the future generations, which sounds like a story of all African leaders, that it's for development is for those who are following us. When are we going to enjoy ourselves, those who are in the current, who are living now? Talk to us about timelines, if there are any examples you could give, PS, on the projects that you have done, because, I mean, we've had Mohan giving some of the challenges. Are you facing those turnaround times?
Yes, we are. For example, what I said about the Port of Walvis Bay, I think most of those projects will be completed at the end of next year. We are talking about a new container terminal. Currently, our capacity is about 360,000 TEUs per annum. We want to put that capacity at about 1 million. This project will be ready at the end of next year, at the end of 2018.
When did it start?
It started about 4 or 5 years ago. I think we are about to complete it, and then we are very thankful, for example, the assistance that we got, or the loan rather, that we got from the African Development Bank in this regard. But there are also other projects. Maybe let me take this opportunity as well as to say that currently Namibia does not have any projects pertaining to PIDA, but we have started the process. There are 4 projects that we are at heart to promote. We are talking about a new railway line from Grootfontein, going to Rundu, to Katima, take care of our neighboring countries. The railway line that is about 900 kilometers. I think we'll be starting very, very short with studies and etc. And then, as I said, this will take a bit of time to complete. That's number one. ADB has actually promised us some resources of which we are going to fund those studies. Number 2, we are talking about TKR, the Trans-Kalahari Railway Line. There's a railway line, 1,500 kilometers from the port of Walvis Bay all the way to Botswana. Initially, the distance, of course, it's about 1,500 kilometers, 750 in Namibia, 750 in Botswana. It was premised on coal, the export of coal. Very good quality coal from Botswana, but while we were doing the studies, the price of coal has dropped, as has other commodities as well. Now we are going to do a very, very quick study that will take us about 6 months, to see which other projects. And then I think that the CEO of NEBAD was talking about corridor approach. We are saying along that corridor, what are the other projects that we could develop to make sure that to sustain this railway line. The third project that we are talking about is pertaining to power generation between Angola and Namibia, Baines power plant, to produce about 650 megawatts of power. You know, our capacity in Namibia, it's about 600, that's what we need. So this could be shared equally between the two countries. And then, of course, the fourth project, it's also the second port that we have in the south of the country, which is called Lutretz. We have been approached by companies in South Africa that are based in Northern Cape, for example. Companies that produces manganese. As you may well know, about 80% of world manganese production is in Northern Cape. Yeah. So they have approached us to see as an alternative to use the port of Lutretz. We already have a railway line from Keetmanshoop, which is about 340 plus minus 340 kilometers from Keetmanshoop to the port of Lutretz. We also want to deepen the port to take advantage of these opportunities. So those are the four projects that we have put through to PICI. PICI is the Presidential Infrastructure Champion Initiative that about 9 or 10 heads of state are promoting in Africa. They are not funding it, they are promoting it so that these projects, you know, and also to strengthen PIDA, you know, so that these projects are discussed at a level of heads of state. We have already been accepted. I think we'll be at the AU Summit at the end of January when that formal announcement would be made. I hope.
Thank you. Thank you very much,
thank you.
PS. Yeah. Let me go to the Director of Infrastructure and Energy, Mr. Sheikh Beda. I think you are the apex of the apex organization of our continent, and I think you have the bird's eye view on seeing where things are moving, where there are probably log germs. And also, I think the issue has always been, yes, we might be a united continent, but we are not a homogeneous continent, and at times cross-border projects are rather difficult to work with. Is that what you're experiencing from where you sit?
Thank you very much, my dear moderator. But allow me, before I will elaborate on your question, allow me also to thank all of you for taking the time to provide coverage for this very important meeting, and also recognize the presence with us, Mr. Kapanji, who is leading the very important continental projects, INGA project. Of course, it's very difficult to add something to the very elaborated status provided by CEO NEPAD, Dr. Mayaki. But I would like just to add maybe three information. First, we built a very strong commitment, very strong political commitment around the PIDA in general as a program, as a reference program for infrastructure in Africa. I think it's very, very important. All our political stakeholders are today fully committed to support this program. And also our partners are very committed to support this program, and I think the example of AU-EU summit in Abidjan was absolutely in line with that. And if you read the declaration for this summit, it was very clear all projects which will be financed by our European partners will be within the PIDA framework. It's very important. The second information, it's also, all of us are aware today about the importance of preparation of projects. And here we are seeing the countries are now, they start now to be involved in the preparation of project, and we had a very good meeting in Addis with permanent representative of countries in Addis to start put in place agenda and the work plan to get countries involved in preparation of projects. Third information, and this a little bit detailed, but it's very important. We have 400 33 projects in the PIDA PAP first phase. And we can say today 30% of these projects are already either under construction or already fully operational. I think it's very important. Getting back to your question, dear moderator, I think our challenges is very clear today. We have to integrate, we have to operationalize these projects as in inclusive manner. We are seeing, for example, about 60% of our population is still in rural areas. But the PIDA PAP in first phase didn't include those people. And this is a very huge challenge. And in the next step, we will try to link those areas, those rural and remote areas, with the very huge corridors already under construction and already in the pipeline. I think it's very important. I mean, our capacity to include rural economy today in inclusive manner, it will be the key of success of our PIDA program. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Director of Infrastructure and Energy from the African Union. Mr. Carreras, I just want to come to you and say, when the CEO was giving his address, he said there were some partners who were skeptical about the grand idea that we were having. But seeing you here, seated here, I suppose it's confirmation on saying that you bought into the idea. And talk to us also about your involvement and what do you think about the work that's going on?
Thank you very much. And let me please start by wishing you all a very good day and thanking for your presence. Listen, if you allow me, Daniel, I would like to start with a message of modesty, because I'm just a civil servant, and we are talking here public coordination, public prioritization, public money, public funding, etc., etc. And the reality is that the scale of the magnitude of the problem that we are considering goes beyond what we humble public servants, civil servants, we can do. This is, it would be a bit delusional to believe that public money, public funding, public coordination will solve the infrastructure deficit or gap in Africa or elsewhere in the world. So let me say, first message I would like to launch is that of modesty. We can only contribute, we can only catalyze, hopefully, and we can only try to use public funds so they bring what's really required, which is the concours, the support, and the contribution of all the society and the private sector. And I hear Mr. Mohan talking about lack of resources and the amount of billions which are required. I hear Dr. Mayaki talking about use of sovereign funds, etc., etc. I'm afraid this could not be enough. So I want to propose a very simple game, an easy rule of multiplication of bread and fish, which is something we've done in the EU, in the European Union, with our European Fund for Sustainable Investment. This is a fund which was created by our president, President Juncker, a few years ago, and has already mobilized more than 200 billion euro, which is a lot of money. It's been done simply by using public funds to catalyze the arrival, the concours, the investment by private money. And the percentages we got were a bit surprising. For instance, with a grant of 1, if it's well used, you can mobilize 11 times, you can bring 11 times private capital. That's called blending, and if you allow me later during the discussion, I can explain how this could work. So you can mobilize 11 for investment with just one. And once you got these 11 invested, you can multiply it 2.5 times, and this would be your contribution to the growth, to the economic growth, or GDP, if we are talking of a country. So, all in all, we can multiply several times the public capital, the public funding, so we can reach our goals. This is, in a nutshell, what we propose from the European Union as a tool. It's called External Investment Plan, and it's a tool of multiplication of investments by placing public capital, public funds, always scarce, wherever it is required, with a number of conditions of technical, of financial, of economic, of social, of environmental, etc., feasibility. This is one message I wanted to give you, but there is a second one. This is the institutional one. As Dr. Sheikh Beda, was referring, we just finalized 1 week ago our triannual EU-AU summit, European Union, African Union summit in Abidjan, in Ivory Coast. The message is that of full support to PIDA efforts in Africa. There is a summit declaration, just 2 days ago was concluded, because we have certain issues with the language, but I'm happy to say it's now final. And in the final words of the declaration, the EU is committed to support PIDA as such, as let me read you exactly what it says, because it goes in the same line that Dr. PIDA was saying. Just a second. As a key catalyst for African infrastructure, a driver for job creation. And the second announcement is that we are working, along with Dr. Beda and other colleagues, we are working on an action plan. It has to be ready in 3 months. And in this action plan, hopefully there will be a complete list of the operations, of the investments that the EU would be supporting from those of the PIDA priority stock. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carreras, and caution and maybe really just bringing reality to the whole thing, and also additions on what we need to do to raise more funding. I think someone was called Dr. Peter. Clearly, this is sinking in. Sadak, the CEO also said, really, this is going to work with member countries and the RECs, and you are one of those RECs as far as implementation is concerned. Talk to us about this region as far as the PIDA projects are concerned, constraints and also successes.
Thank you very much, moderator, and thank you everybody for coming. And within the framework of SADC, the one guiding document that we are using to support our member states in respect of infrastructure is the Regional Infrastructure Development Master Plan, which, as Dr. Miyake was saying, is quite aligned to the PIDA program, which in fact took a lot of the projects out of this master plan that I'm relating to. And this master plan was adopted by heads of state and government in 2012, and is the basis on which we have now done what we call PIDA Acceleration Program, where we have a number of projects, both in the road, rail, energy, and ICT and water, that are looking at advancing infrastructure in the region with full participation of our member states. And the approach that we are using as a regional bloc is also one of looking at implementing this project within the corridors. For the PIDA program, we have 2 prioritized corridors, the North-South corridor and the Beira corridor. And in respect of developing these projects, we have actually gone on to have all the member states who are part of those corridors agreeing to establish coordinating institutions to make sure that the work that is done within the framework of PIDA project acceleration are actually done within a very well coordinated arrangement. As you may be aware that we need to be moving goods and services from the source or production to where we can sell them, and the corridors are therefore a very good framework within which to work, where you can address all the modes of transport that you require to take your goods and services, even to take and make sure that there's intra-trade within the Southern African sub-region. And I think, just as an example of some of the projects that we have are part of the PIDA but are very important, particularly in the energy sector, is in an interconnector project that is looking at interconnecting the Southern African power pool with the Eastern African power pool through the Zambia, Tanzania, Kenya interconnector. This is a very important project because whereas we may produce a lot of power, this power has to be moved from where it is produced to where it is required in terms of demand. And for interconnectivity, therefore, it's very critical that you are able to transmit this energy where it's produced to the areas where it is required. And as SADC is actually now focusing on industrialization, most of these projects within PIDA are also going to support that industrial drive, which is also an AU strategy, which is based on the AU 2063 strategy. So for SADC, we are having a number of activities that we are looking at. Because, as you have heard, one of the challenges we are having within the infrastructure fraternity is the state of development of our projects. SADC has also developed facilities that support us in project development. And this is the project development facility that is housed at the DBSA, which is the PPDF, funded by our partners, in this particular case, EU and KFW. But there's an effort also at the SADC level to develop our own regional SADC development fund with a window that is going to target specifically issues of infrastructure. And that is in recognition of the fact that infrastructure is a facilitative process that if we are to integrate, we'll need to have that infrastructure to move both the people but also services and trade within our region. So this is one of the things that we are doing. In terms of the ICT, there are programs that are planned and are currently being taken off. And this may not necessarily be fitting also within the PIDA program specifically, but they are also part of the infrastructure projects that we are looking at. You may be aware that the broadband development within the region in terms of having the region connected one to each other in terms of the countries is a very important aspect that we need to be following through. And within the master plan, we have such a project that is connecting our member states, particularly connecting us amongst ourselves and to the world at large through the undersea cable that is landed in some of our countries. I think the undersea cable that is landed here in Walvis Bay to connect the other countries, Swakopmund, in fact here in Swakopmund. So these are some of the projects that are very critical and important to make sure that we address the respective needs. And one very important project also is on railway. We are having a study that is looking at missing link in terms of railway from the DRC all the way to the port of Durban, because there's a lot of production that takes place along the route that needs to be looked at. And that project is very critical for us, if we are to achieve it, to move forward and advance PIDA program in Africa. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. But there's a follow-up question I have for you, then I'll go to the PS of information in Namibia. How easy is it to implement these programs across countries, across the borders?
Well,
no, I was staying with you. But I mean, go ahead.
Thank you. It's relatively easy, but it's still quite difficult.
Why is it difficult? What's
you know, some of these projects require that there are requisite agreements that countries have to sign to agree to implement together jointly some of these projects. Not that maybe the countries will not be willing to, but time it takes because of the requirements of national constitutions for some of these agreements to be signed. It does sometimes delay the implementation of the projects. But
So
because
if I may just understand,
Yes.
and I mean this is a question really for the panel. So if I may understand, we are hungry to making sure we integrate. We want to make Africa work. We
Yeah.
want the economies of the continent to work, but we struggle in agreeing on these projects to go across the borders.
No, I think I was saying in some instances there would be delays in terms of getting those things concluded in order to get the project on course. But because we have instruments or documents that are agreed already, that makes it much easier then for us to implement joint projects. The master plan is one area. The corridors where the countries are now agreeing to implement joint projects then becomes an easier way of doing the thing.
No, thank you very much. Just for information, we are about to come to the floor, so if there are roving mics, please get them ready. If you have a question, one question per person, directed to a particular person. Tell us who you are and whom you represent, and there's no add-on questions. And we want to make sure that we have as many people as possible who will ask questions. If you start asking 3, I'll stop you. Thank you very much. Minister of Information, I think I said that, I'm saying Minister, Permanent Secretary. Maybe it's a prophecy of things to come, Permanent Secretary. I say that I said that this is the first conference I've attended where the fourth estate is briefed first, and I'm giving credit to Dr. Mayaki and team. But what I want to know is, do you think people quite understand what PIDA is about? And I'm talking about the media that you work with, and whether people are quite informed on what this is all about. And if it's not, should we blame people like you?
Thank you very much. Namibia has pride in being the country that enjoys freest press in the continent. We accept mutual blame or square blame, but we are blessed this morning and this week that we have the PIDA week in Namibia, and the media fraternity is being invited to start shedding off reporting on dark stories like coups, which we are currently managing to call transformational bloodless leadership discourse, and to pick on infrastructure as our main areas of focus that perhaps SADC can also help in this part of the continent, and to establish awards for those that will take keen interest in pursuing specific PIDA and infrastructure projects in general, so as to inform the public, because my senior brother earlier on at the end spoke about public resources, and it is only with the goodwill of the public that these resources can be multiplied when the public understand and have appreciation of what their tax hard-earned resources are to be used for. So we have the challenge that we shall take the bull by the horns with great pride. We can no longer dwell on what we have failed to do by amply informing our citizens across the borders, but we are present, we are not future, we are here, we are alive, and we will take the mission forward.
Thank you. Could I have the mic, please? Thank you very much, Permanent Secretary Wanjarakarana. I thought I would just do that to let you know. Yeah, tried. Yeah. Questions from the floor. Before we do that, could we get roving mics near the people who have raised? I see there's some hands here right in front, but before we do that, Mr. Inka, sir, from the ECA, talk to us about doing all these opportunities through the model law, and they explain that to us, what that's all about. And I'll also then announce what will be happening on the sidelines of by the ECA. Sir, could we have a mic to Mr. Inka, please?
Yeah. Good morning. I'm happy that I had the opportunity to to address two fundamental things that you had asked the panel.
Yes.
One is why are projects not ready? Secondly, the issue of regulatory frameworks. The first issue, I think, was answered efficiently by Sheikh, in that projects are not well prepared and they are not well developed. So the converse is, if they are well prepared and they're well developed, they will be attractive to investors. The second thorny issue which has been raised is that of regulatory framework. We saw this in our interaction with the organized private sector, in our interaction with high net worth individuals across the world. And one of the things they said was, there are just too many laws, too many policies, too many regulations across Africa when we are talking about transboundary infrastructure. We took this, standing on the shoulders of Dr. Mayaki, we took this to our heads of state. We were able to get a decision last week, decision 563. They asked ECA to work with NEPAD agency and evolve a continental framework, which will really satisfy what the DBS is saying, what the SADC is saying. This framework that will be attractive to private investors. We have done that. We actually are in the process of submitting it formally in January to elicit the appropriate decision. This framework is called the PIDA model law. It is what we'll be discussing this afternoon at, I think it's CRC. It deals with everything that the private sector has been saying has been inhibiting their interest. The question of transparency, movement of goods and personnel, dispute resolutions, all of this stuff that anybody who wants to put his money somewhere will be grappling with across the board. You see, Namibia does not have problems getting infrastructure interest within Namibia. But as you heard the PAMSEC say, if you have to connect 3, 4, 5 countries, then the problem starts. The model law solves all of these problems. All right. Yes, it solves because it is a framework model law. What that means is that when we come to Namibia to say we want to domesticate this model law, Namibia will say we have an existing bilateral with, say, Germany. Therefore, Article 2 is not attractive to us. Namibia will say, I remove Article 2. They will take whatever it is that they need. Whatever is not needed, they don't need to worry about it. So no, the model law is really, you don't say, I like having surgery. You don't say, oh, so, if you don't need surgery, you don't do surgery. So if you don't have problems attracting investment, you really don't need the model law, but most of us need it. That is why people, like Dangote, have been saying, just take care of this thing. Give us one continental framework and see the difference. We think that is ready. We think if we get our decision at the summit in January, we will go to the next phase, working with the REX, working with NEPAD agency, to start domesticating this law across African countries. We think that will unlock a private sector investment.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. Yes, hoping that those decisions are then accepted. Questions? We have a hand here. Yes, and then I'll come to you, sir. Then I'll come to you, ma'am. Then I'll come to you. Okay.
Good morning. My name is Angel. I work with The Guardian. I'm based in Tanzania. Just to ask, moderator, does the rule of 3 questions, 1 question apply to the media too?
Yes. So ask your question, and if you have time, I'll come back to you, ma'am. I'm just trying to, I know it's your day today as the media, but we need to allow other media too. Yeah, so first question for now.
Okay, thank you. My first question goes to Dr. Mayaki. I just wanted to find out the issue of budget allocation to head of states. Is there a recommended percent, like the one you have for agriculture is 10%? What about the one for infrastructure?
Thank you. I'll take one, I'll take 3, and then we'll go to the podium. Next question was, yes, you, sir.
My name is Abdulmenan Fauzi, journalist from Egypt, Gomoriya newspaper. It's Arabic.
Okay.
I know that infrastructure takes times.
Your question, you're directing it to whom?
I directing to Mr. Director of Infrastructure.
Okay.
We would like to inform people about PIDA and what it did, and the good job it did it. So I would like to you said that 30% of our project of PIDA, it's about to finish. So I would like to elaborate more about this project, to let people know what you did.
Thank you very much. Question at the back.
Hello, my name's Uzo. I'm not from the media. I'm actually a moderator for the PIDA Model Law session. I have a question for Mohan Vivekanandan. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. You talked about the fact that there is a lot of money out there, but also it needs to be paid back. So these big infrastructure projects, the issue on the continent is the fact that the population is not fully ready to pay that bill. So what would you propose? Because that's a long-term issue. If we have investment, that's great, but then how do we pay it back? Thanks.
Thank you very much. We come to the podium. Dr. Mayaki, sir. I think the question was to you first.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your question. 4 issues regarding your question. The first one is, PIDA is about regional projects, not national projects. It's important to make that differentiation because sometimes, we shift from a national project to regional projects. INGA is a regional project within DRC, but it's a regional project. But PIDA is about regional projects, point number 1. Point number 2, our governments know how to do national projects in infrastructure. As a matter of fact, 80% in the continent, 80% of the funding of infrastructure nationally is done through national budgets. And this has been so since the independences. And many studies show that, let me give you some figures regarding West Africa. In West Africa, the colonial governments invested very little in infrastructure. In the 60s, when most of West African countries became independent, they multiplied their investment in infrastructure by 20, just to give you an idea. So it's important to mention that governments since the independences have been investing a lot in infrastructure. Point number 3, as we relatively know how to do national infrastructure, we are in a learning curve in what regards regional infrastructure. Learning curve about several issues: how to fund regional infrastructure, how to manage them institutionally, how to harmonize regulatory frameworks. So all these issues come on, how to frame PPPs on regional projects. We are in a learning curve. So PIDA is supporting and helping solve the constraints of the learning curve in implementing regional infrastructure. And it will mean, evidently, innovative financial mechanisms. Point number 4. Where did the progress took place? First one, in internal revenue mobilization. And in this case, Namibia is a very good case. You are right to say, indirectly in your question, that fiscal pressure in Africa is very low. As a matter of fact, and DCA has done quite a lot of studies on that, we have the lowest fiscal pressure through all the regions of the world. So we could increase that fiscal pressure. If we increase that fiscal pressure to 25, 30, we can mobilize resources that will allow us to no longer depend on aid. Lastly, as Prime Minister Zenawi was saying, we need to formulate our diagnosis according to our own terms. You see? And this is what we do through PIDA. So we don't want to be derailed in thinking outside of PIDA. Whatever problems PIDA has, whatever obstacles we have in that learning curve, we stick to our framework. If we don't stick to our framework and we are derailed by other frameworks, then we will not achieve what we designed PIDA for.
Thank you very much. And then there was a question for Mohan. Oh, the director will come to you after Mohan. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for this very important question. In fact, the list of projects for PIDA PAP 1 include 433 projects. As I said, 30%, and specifically we have 50 projects already operational, 83 under construction. Within those 50 projects already operational, we have almost of them, they are power plants, transmission lines, and corridors. You can maybe get more detail in 2017 report prepared by NEPAD and which will be distributed within this week. Thank you.
Thank you. Mohan.
So in answering the question around how do you pay for the infrastructure, there's two ways to do it, right? One, projects that are economically feasible in the long term but not immediately financially sustainable have to be paid through the fiscus of governments. On the other hand, there are other projects that are both economically sustainable and financially sustainable as well. And those can be done in a manner where private sector can provide the offtake. So as an example, a lot of power generation projects now, ports, airports are such that you can design them without necessarily having to need a government guarantee, without necessarily having to rely on the fiscus. As an example, we recently did a project in Madagascar. It was about a 250 million euro project called the Ravenala project, where it's an airport revitalization. And that's something that really didn't require a government offtake. And even if the Malagasy government was able to provide that, given their fiscal position, it wouldn't have necessarily made the project any more bankable. So we were able to work with the IFC, other entities, to structure that project in a way without needing to go to the government fiscus. And there's a number of projects. If you think about the renewable energy program in South Africa, yes, ultimately there's an offtake, but that's 200 billion rands, about $15 billion of investments that's come through, and 90% plus has been from the private sector. So there are those projects that can be done without having to rely on it. Now, then there are those projects, and a lot of the PIDA projects fit into this category because they're transboundary. They're ones which do require a government offtake. And I think in those cases, the governments need to ensure that the limited financing that they have is being put towards the most critical projects that are going to have the greatest development impact. And I think that's why the work that NEPAD is doing around PIDA is so important, because it ensures that the limited financing that is available is going towards those priority projects. Because if you start utilizing the limited financing towards other projects that can either be handled through private sector offtake, or where you're using limited funding towards projects that are nice to have and not crucial, then I think we're making a mistake. Because so I think those would be the way that I would suggest it. One, use private sector offtake where possible. Where you need limited public sector offtake, focus it on the most important projects for a country and a region.
Thank you. More questions? All right. I'll come here, 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 and then we'll go back. I didn't see where. Oh, sorry. Oh, yes. Yeah, I meant to. Okay, I'll go around and then I'll come to you, gentlemen. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Gabrielle Nina from the Democratic Republic of Congo. My question is addressing to Mr. Mohan. Is the public-private partnership the solution of African infrastructure project? And what are the risks of the PPP? And I have another question for Mr.
One for now.
Sorry.
Next question. I'll come back to you if we have time. Yes, ma'am. There was a question on the table. Yeah.
Good morning. I'm Doreen from Zambia. My question is directed to SADC. How are you addressing...
Are you a journalist?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
I work for the Zambia Daily Mail.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mine is directed to SADC. How are you addressing these challenges you mentioned, like the barriers you're facing in implementing the two projects? I know Batoka and the ZKT. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, you sir.
Okay, good morning. My name is Frank Gahan. I'm working from Omrafik Magazine. I'm based in Cameroon. My question is addressed to Dr. Mayaki, the CEO of NEPAD. In January 2012, AU State of Government adopted PIDA as the master program for infrastructural development in Africa. And today, 5 years later, what concretely PIDA has brought? And as a planning and coordinating agency, so what are the major challenges you are facing right now, and how do you intend to overcome it? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We go, I think it's Mohan again, your first question.
You know, I think it's a good question because PPPs are being touted as a solution, and I think it's a solution, but in a limited manner. The reason being that a lot of projects don't really set themselves up well to be used and done on a PPP basis. So I think if you think about the majority of infrastructure, it's really the role of the state to ensure there's a long-term plan in place for a sector, and then to have the institutions within that state to ensure that the infrastructure gets built and maintained. Having said that, I think there is a role for a certain limited set of infrastructure which can be done on a PPP basis. And for instance, where we've seen them being successful, and we fund a number of these both in South Africa and outside of South Africa, certainly, for instance, in the electricity sector, in the generation thereof can definitely be done on a PPP basis. The transmission and distribution, quite a bit more difficult to do. You can structure it as such, but all you're doing often is just adding on extra layers of complexity and cost on the transmission side. Similarly, on transport, I would say things like ports, airports, and potentially, for instance, urban mass transit could be done on a PPP basis. But I think transboundary projects are quite a challenge to do on a PPP. And by PPP, I mean where the private sector is actually putting in equity participation. And they will build, not just build it, but operate that asset for a significant period of time. And I think in the water and sanitation case, I know in Rwanda there is one that's been happening, but generally speaking, it's a significant challenge to do projects in water and sanitation in that manner. ICT, definitely, you know, we're already seeing the significant rollout of ICT infrastructure, mainly through the private sector. So I think it depends on the sector, and even within a sector, the sub-area thereof, some of which do set up well for PPPs, but many of them do not.
Thank you very much. Sadak, I think your question.
Yes, the question was how do we resolve the challenges in implementing some of the projects. Depending on the nature of the challenge, particularly if it's an issue of needing to facilitate countries involved in that particular project to take on, we offer the necessary platform for those countries to discuss, but also because the two projects you are mentioning are ones that deal with energy. It is really an issue of facilitating the 2 or 3 countries that are involved to make sure that the actual instruments that are required for them to do that joint project are in place. In the case of the Zambia-Tanzania interconnector, obviously the SAP and the EAPP are as the 2 RECs. We have actually made arrangements to make sure that those 2 can talk and make arrangements to see how that project can be implemented. And I think this is something that we, as a region, we only facilitate, but the countries involved do the actual work on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Mayaki, I think there was a question for you, sir.
So when we put our house in order, we hunt as a team. What do I mean by hunting as a team? The African Development Bank is supporting NEPAD to support the regional economic communities through an agreement with the African Union Commission. The Economic Commission for Africa is supporting us as an implementing agency in order to focus on the key elements of de-risking, and de-risking being a key dimension for attracting investment. With the regional economic communities, by supporting their capacity in the PIDA process, we also hunt as a team. So the challenge is hunting as a team. The more we hunt as a team, the better we create the synergies. So in my thinking, the issues of financing, harmonizing regulatory frameworks, of managerial, appropriate institutions to manage a corridor. These are challenges we need to tackle, but that's not the most important. The most important is hunting as a team.
Thank you. More questions. I know one question here. There's a question right at the back. And any other question? No question right now. Yes, sir. Could you?
Okay, good morning. My name is Babuluki Semele. I'm a journalist working for the Department of Broadcasting Services in Botswana. My question is directed to African Union, Dr. Bena. African Union is home to 55 countries. How do we go forward and push the agenda of infrastructure development without infringing on the sovereignty of these 55 countries? Thank you.
Thank you. Question at, yes, sir?
Thank you. My name is Cleopas Namene Ngwena. Namene means I was born in the morning. It's in Africa. I am a Swakopmund councillor. As an alternate chairperson of management committee. Yeah, my question is direct to Mr. Mohan. And my question, how many country members signed PIDA agreement and how many countries didn't sign so that we can see this project is working?
Okay. Thank you. I'm sure if Mohan needs help from Mr. Mayaki or the AU, will probably have to get it there. I think the first question was for you, Mohan. Yeah? AU.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Very quickly to respond to your question, I would like to recall that all decisions on the PIDA project were adopted by heads of state. It's mean the question of sovereignty is behind you now. All countries are very committed and strongly committed to support this project. This is the first. The second aspect is also very important. Our diversity, it can also be a very important element to get this program implemented. Because we have in some regions, for example, for instance, we have a very high potential of hydropower, for example. In some region, we have a solar potential, if we are talking about energy aspect. If we can implement a common market for energy, for example, you see the energy mix will be reliable for all countries. And here, I think the sovereignty will be also taken in consideration, and we can build a common market for energy to supply each other with a very affordable kind of energy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mohan, you have a humdinger of a question there, so you want to answer that question, or do you need help?
Yeah, I don't really have any idea on the number of countries that have signed, so somebody else will have to.
Okay, I think Dr. Mayaki probably would help better. Is it?
PIDA is an African Union decision adopted by all the African states, heads of states. So this is why we are working on it.
Okay.
Was there a question behind that question, or
maybe there was. I think the sense I'm getting, we can refer back to the councillor. But I think the question is, it's one thing having an idea of, wanting to have this grand idea of all of us working together. But who is actually committed, and what are countries that have now achieved some projects of note? I think that's the crux of the question.
When we put our house in order, when we do not have our house in order, we are criticized because the house is not in order. And when we put the house in order, there are questions about how well is the house ordered. So, you see, and as an African, what I'm sensing is that we are questioning ourselves too much. Japan didn't question itself after the Second World War. They started working. China doesn't question itself on how it moves on a long-term strategy, you see? Germany didn't question itself in putting its house in order too. But we are always kind of skeptic about ourselves. And that skepticism sometimes is reinforced by external actors, and we try to reflect ourselves in the external actors. We have put our house in order. We have challenges, we have constraints, but we need to move and implement. The question is about implementing. The question is not about, adding skepticism, will it work? Because behind that, and that's a philosophical question, behind that, the question, will it work, is linked to, will it work as they are Africans? So we shouldn't fall in that type of thinking. We need to move. It's a question of having confidence in ourselves, not building on skepticism. Okay, criticism which leads to improvements is fine, but skepticism which weakens your capacity to implement is not fine.
Okay, so you're saying there's a thin line between self-introspection and criticizing oneself, and I suppose. All right, is there a last round of questions? Then we go. I think you had one, and you had one, and you had one. And then those are the last questions we're going to have, unfortunately. And we need to move on.
Mine is directed to Dr. Mayaki. I know as Africa, we need to be more innovative in financing the infrastructure projects. So besides PIDA, what other initiative is in place to support infrastructure growth in Africa? Thank you.
Go ahead.
He is better placed than me to respond. Okay.
The AU will answer that question. Thank you.
Okay, I think I will respond under your control.
No, not now. Sorry, Director. Once we're done. Thank you very much.
I think mine can be responded with either Dr. Mayaki or the AU Director. Mine is the infrastructure and linking to PIDA. I want to link it with business environment. Now, my question is the private sector. At what percent is it involved?
Okay. Involvement of private sector. Yes. Last question for the day.
We are talking about the job creation. how do you think you can create jobs when the infrastructure works in Africa is 80% undertaken by foreigners? By foreigners, I mean Chinese companies, Western companies.
Okay, was that for Dr. Mayaki or? Dr. Mayaki. Okay. Oh, yes, sir. Final.
Yeah. Somehow my question is linked to it. Sorry, my name is Pule. I work for SABC in South Africa.
Okay.
My question is, we talk a lot about plans, but people want to know how these plans impact on their lives. So I'd like Dr. Mayaki or the Director for Infrastructure to talk to one or two projects that have changed lives and how.
Thank you very much. I think the questions will have to be distributed between Dr. Mayaki and Dr. Beda.
Merci. Of course, I will respond under the control of CEO NEPAD here present. In plus or to PIDA program, for example, we are in within this continental framework. We are managing many other initiatives. For example, you have ARE, which is African Renewable Energy Initiative. It's very important, and regarding the very high potential and very huge potential of renewable energy in particular, and also taking into consideration the very huge lack in access to energy, for example, I think this very important initiative. The partners, and particularly European side, France, Germany, are very committed to support Africa in this initiative, and already we approved 19 projects under these initiatives. Another very important also initiative, it's also the single air transport market. The single air transport market, we will have a launch of this single air transport market during January Summit 2018, and it will include, as first step, it will include 23 countries. Already we will have open sky and liberalized market totally within those countries. The last point, for example, also we have a very important initiatives ongoing in terms of digitalization of continent in general, and particularly how we can implement and how we can use ICT and digitalization specifically for the smart corridors, for example, to increase efficiency of traffic within corridors. Thank you.
Thank you. So when we look at the current development strategies at the level of the African Union, I'm coming back to putting the house in order. As you know, we have Agenda 2063. Many skeptics say, well, you can't plan for 50 years. So these are generalities. The question is not that we are planning for 50 years. The question is we have a vision of where we want to be in 2063 in order to pull all the other strategic frameworks. So PIDA is one strategic framework. A CADEP in agriculture is another strategic framework. IDA is a strategic framework in industrialization. So you have 11 strategic frameworks. Some say, well, 11 is too much. How will they be able to manage 11 frameworks? Well, the question is that these 11 frameworks have a coherence between themselves. So, and that coherence has to be applied at regional economic community level. So some will say, well, how will you apply 11 frameworks even if they are coherent at regional level given the capacities of the regional economic communities? Well, if there is a challenge there, the challenge has to be tackled. All in all, the big numbers we are facing are 450 million jobs that need to be created in 2035. These 400 million youngsters we are talking about are already born and with us. And we will not be able to do that without a sound industrialization strategy. And without what the director was saying, without agricultural transformation. So both for that agricultural transformation and for industrialization, energy is a critical factor. So this is why, without diminishing the importance of the other sectors, we need to flag energy as a critical issue. And this is why, in all these domains, just to cite an example, Inga 3 and then afterwards the Grand Inga is a priority. So it's important for us as Africans to understand why Inga 3 and the Grand Inga, about which we talk since 50 years, which are not technical problems, which have no, the issue of Inga 3 and the ministers there is not a technical issue. When Inga was started to be thought about, I mean, between the time when Inga was started to be thought about and today, I don't know how many, similar Ingas have been constructed throughout the world. So we do not have this is not a technical issue. There is close to a technical issue, other issues. And these other issues are the issues that are linked to the fact and the need that we have to put our house in order. So energy is absolutely critical. Point number 2, job creation. With Germany, we have framed a job creation toolkit regarding PIDA, which is quite a very concrete toolkit, which shows, according to each of the projects that we have, regional priority projects within PIDA, how it is feasible to provide the necessary jobs to be created. Well, formulated differently, how it is important to prioritize job creation. So, examples, if you, of success, if you take Algiers to Lagos, this highway has 4,500 kilometers. It's done, and the remaining part, which is about 90 kilometers, is being funded by the African Development Bank. So when you talk about an highway of 4,500 kilometers, you can say you have a success story. Another PC project, which is the fiber optic from Algeria through Niger to Nigeria, already 700 kilometers have been done through Algeria. And then you have a gas pipeline, which is another PC project. So if you want the gas pipeline, the highway, and the optic fiber, you have elements that can constitute a corridor. So then some criticism will come, well, how will you manage this corridor because of the insecurity and so on, and the Libya issue? Well, this is a challenge, and we need to tackle it. But it's not because of insecurity, but we want to move ahead. So challenges are there, constraints are there, but the political will is there. And we need to move and solve problems and stop being skeptic about ourselves.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, that's where we come to the end of this session. And I think the message from Dr. Mayaki is challenges do not equal to failure. We are going to a round table at about 10 o'clock. So we have just about 10 minutes. So thank you very much. A round of applause again for our panelists, and also for the audience and the journalists that came and asked those questions. Thank you very much. We'll see you upstairs.